exhibit booth, and he was at the booth. And this is a liposomal system. And a lot of people and a lot of functional medicine practitioners have been using it. So I'm requesting you to please look into that. So the more people will know, at least, everybody is not going to go for the chelation and all, but this may be the better and simple way to do it. This is
And
my request.
Rita, if you can type that into the chat also, just so people can read it.
Sure, sure.
You spoke a little bit about chelation and possibly detoxing may be dangerous in and of itself because you're bringing these chemicals back, through your system. Is that correct?
Well, I just said it's just an empirical finding that in this study published in the New England Journal of Medicine, they gave an iron chelator. It lowered the levels of iron in the brain, but people got worse, much worse.
So what are your thoughts on what Rita was saying as far as are there any hopes for pulling this stuff out of your body without making yourself sicker? I mean, it's great that your blood looks great, that that your levels look great, but if you're sicker than you would have been had you left it there, it's like I think McKinley was shot with a bullet and he died not of the bullet but of the attempts to remove the bullet, right?
Yeah. So I'm a researcher, and so I love evidence, and so that's what I love to see. And so I think you can have hypotheses, and it's worth pursuing those hypotheses, and then we need to test them. And the nice thing is we can do clinical trials to test out whether these interventions are beneficial or not. So for example, we thought vitamin E and antioxidant might be helpful when Parkinson's, so we studied it not to be helpful. We thought coenzyme Q10 in early studies, and another antioxidant shown to be promising in early trials, but in a larger scale clinical trial, not. I think for some of these things is that the metals or the injury could have happened in childhood, as we were saying, and so the process has been playing out. So if you go back and try to address the initial event 30 years later, it just might be too late. But doesn't mean that we shouldn't be studying these things and looking for alternatives to do it. But again, I think we're spending a tremendous amount of time and energy trying to cure a preventable disease. We don't cure polio. We don't cure COVID. We don't cure HIV. There's only been 3 people in the history of the world ever cured with HIV. But HIV might disappear as a major clinical entity in our lifetimes because of people like Larry Kramer, and because we're preventing the disease, and we're even giving, in some cases, medications to reduce the risk of transmission. If we can get rid of HIV in our lifetime without curing it, it really speaks to the power of prevention. I mean, look at COVID. We don't cure COVID. We don't cure polio. We don't cure lots of things. We don't cure smallpox, but we just don't have these diseases because we've gotten rid of them.
And are you seeing anything on a governmental level that gives you hope either in the United States or any country that may be an example of a paradigm for how to handle this?
Yeah, so you look at Europe, and I alluded to the study in the Netherlands. The rates of Parkinson's are growing least rapidly, in fact, plateauing in Europe, where we have clean air regulations around pesticides, although they have gaps too, and much less use of this dry cleaning chemical trichloroethylene. The United States, the EPA, Dr. Michael Friedhoff and colleagues proposed a ban on trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene last year. That proposal hasn't been implemented yet, but that's promising. The EPA got rid of chlorpyrifos, banned that pesticide that's on apples that's causing intellectual disabilities, likely in children, widely used on golf courses, used on utility poles. But its manufacturers sued in court, and the court sent it back to the EPA to be reevaluated. So you can see that there are interests that are allowing these chemicals to remain in our environment in increasing numbers. Paraquats from 1960s. No one listening here would fly in an airplane from the 1960s. If engineers can develop safer airplanes, then chemists, American chemists are smart. They can develop smarter, safer chemicals for enhancing our food production. So there are lots of things that we can do as a society to address it. We're starting to do some things around the edges, but we need to do vastly more.
So you mentioned golfers or golf courses a couple of times. Do golfers have a higher rate of Parkinson's disease? One thing that I think we find is that when things happen to disadvantaged people, nothing, there's no real pushback to it. But when things happen to wealthier people, which obviously golfers are going to be, disproportionately wealthy than the general population. Are these people suffering from Parkinson's disease at a higher rate?
So no one's done that study that I know about. I'm going to tell you a couple vignettes. One in the Annals of Neurology, one of the top neurology journals, two researchers reported a cluster of Parkinson's disease around a golf course. 18 people, as I recall, with Parkinson's who all lived around the golf course, and 15 of them lived downwind of the golf course. So you can imagine these pesticides are being sprayed, as I indicated before. Individuals, many of these toxins are inhaled, and those might be the most potent ways of getting Parkinson's is entry through the nose. The nose might be the front door of the brain. There was also a study, I think, down in the 1990s, but in the 20th century, looking at superintendents of golf courses. It's something like the Golf Superintendents Golf Course Association of America or something like that. And there they found high rates of brain diseases in these individuals. I think the size was too small to see if there was statistical significance for Parkinson's disease, but as I recall, there was like twice as many people with Parkinson's among golf course superintendents. So there are lots of these clues. I mentioned that there are studies that found that green space workers are at higher risk of ALS. Green space workers are at higher risk of Parkinson's disease. Farmers are clearly at higher risk of Parkinson's disease, especially farmers who work with paraquat. But even people who simply live near where paraquat is being sprayed, research by Dr. Vieta Ritz at UCLA has shown that individuals who live near where these pesticides are being sprayed, they're not farmers themselves, are at higher risk of developing Parkinson's disease.
And do these toxic chemicals naturally clear themselves from the environment? Are there ways that you're aware of to remediate an area that has been exposed to this? Or are these, Chernobyl, chemical versions of Chernobyl where like they're just dead zones for centuries potentially?
So I'm a neurologist, I'm not an environmental scientist, but many of these things are really slow to decay in the environment. So trichloroethylene, its half-life is an order of 5 to 10 years or something of that order of magnitude. So they're really slow. There have been studies that have been looked at feeding bacteria into polluted water or the like to see if that can work. For trichloroethylene, the one, the chemical that evaporates from groundwater and soil, there's a nice remediation system, just like people have radon remediation systems in their homes to prevent them from radon from entering their homes. You can have that same remediation system, can be really beneficial to prevent people from getting exposure to TCE in their homes, schools, and workplaces. And those things are called sub-slab depressurization systems, are in place in lots of places. And they should be in place, I think, in Newport Beach, California, where I went to high school, in these homes that have it, because that could decrease the risk. I'd much rather have that than an air purifier that's competing for breathing in this chemical with my kids' lungs. To me, that's craziness. But so I think there are ways to remediate and ways to mitigate exposure.
So you introduced us to, or many of us, to a great word, agnotology, the intentional cause of ignorance and confusion on a particular matter. What are the tactics of the industry in their attempt to keep the public ignorant, and what are common misperceptions or misconceptions because of that?
So this is according to The Guardian, the chemical company for paraquat has a SWAT team that observes any research that comes out, seeks to discredit researchers. So my colleague, Dr. Debbie Slechta, works across the street in that building. And she was nominated to serve on an EPA advisory committee. According to reporting for The Guardian, the company hired a third-party lobbying firm to lobby the EPA to prevent her from serving on that advisory panel, and was successful in doing so. The companies widely introduce things into the literature that are incomplete or inaccurate, or, you can imagine doing a study to see if golfers are at higher risk of Parkinson's would be really hard to do so. But if you just studied a small number of golfers, that's one way to be sure that your study can come to the conclusion that it's not associated with an increased risk. Or if you only studied golfers for 2 years after they stopped playing, that would be another way to demonstrate that it is. So there are lots of ways that you can set up your study to bias you to finding a null result. It's really hard to get a positive result, like everything's stacked against you. So when you find a positive result, you need to pay attention. Companies, I'll tell you what else. I wrote a paper on paraquat, Parkinson's, and agnotology. My reward for doing so was having someone knock on my door, ask my son if I was home. so that they could issue me a subpoena. So we should be looking at what these chemical companies are doing, why they're hiring the same law firms that defended big tobacco, that are now defending chemical companies that are seeking to introduce products into our environment that are known, if not clearly associated with Parkinson's disease, and why they're getting a free ride on this. We need to hold wrongdoers accountable. Those wrongdoers include the big tobacco executives who went to Congress and swore to tell the truth and nothing but the truth in the 1990s and did anything but it. Why aren't these people being held accountable? Why aren't some people being sent to jail for their actions? If we hold wrongdoers accountable, they will change their behavior. If we do not hold wrongdoers accountable, they will only become emboldened. We were fooled on tobacco. We were fooled on the opioid pandemic. We're being less fooled on social media. We should be less fooled on pesticides. We should be less fooled on dry cleaning chemicals. We should be less fooled on air pollution. We should be less fooled on climate change. You know, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We know what they're up to. They follow exactly the same script. They hire exactly the same lawyers. They've hired exactly the same experts. They hire the same firms to do the same studies to cast doubt on any product. They'll do the same thing. They'll tell you that smoking doesn't cause lung cancer today if they could, and they do. We need to be really, really, really vigilant and hold wrongdoers accountable. There's no reason that we should be subsidizing the cost of Parkinson's disease. As a society, we spend $25 billion through Medicare, caring for over 1 million Medicare beneficiaries with Parkinson's disease. We spend $25 billion so a company like that manufactures Paraquat can make $400 million in revenue. Why are we subsidizing the cost of the chemical companies? Why are we doing that monetarily? And why are we doing that with our children? Why are we doing that with our seniors? Why are we doing that with our adults? We need to hold wrongdoers accountable.
Have you seen any successful pushbacks of anything analogous to this? So not necessarily with Parkinson's disease, but let's say the smoking in the tobacco companies in the 90s. Have you seen anything that you're saying, oh, that's the model for how to handle this situation?
Well, yeah, the tobacco companies end up paying billions of dollars. Asbestos manufacturers have paid billions of dollars. The U.S. government is going to pay billions of dollars to care for the Marines that they knowingly exposed to trichloroethylene in their drinking water. The Marines refused to even notify the Marines that they exposed to these chemicals after the fact so they could get cancer screened. It took congressional action and a really, 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 really pissed off Marine, Jerry Insminger, whose daughter died from leukemia, to change the course of Camp Lejeune and to bring justice for the 1 million Marines, their families and civilians, who were knowingly exposed to trichloroethylene for 25 years at Camp Lejeune. When we do that, we can change behavior. The Marines aren't going to be using trichloroethylene anymore, or their use will be sharply curtailed because of being held accountable. Marines will think twice about knowingly exposing 20-year-olds, the best and brightest among us, to toxins when they know the story of Camp Lejeune. If we hold wrongdoers accountable, we change the behavior and we all benefit from it. When we don't, we only embolden wrongdoers to continue to push the envelope, to continue to do more and more actions and see how far they can get away with it. We need to hold all wrongdoers accountable through all elements of society.
And are you familiar with there's a new chemical being used on produce to help preserve it so that way it can be more shelf stable. It's called Appeal. Are you familiar with that?
No, but there's something called the precautionary principle. So in the United States, for a drug to be approved, it needs to be shown to be safe and effective. We should adopt that same principle for new products, to make produce last longer on shelves. If it shows to be safe and effective, fine, have it. But right now we put the onus on people to show that these chemicals are harmful instead of the onus on chemical companies to show that their products are beneficial. We do it for drugs. We require the drugs be safe and effective before they're approved. We should do the exact same thing for chemicals. We should stop giving the benefit of the doubt to chemicals and start giving the benefit of the doubt to people.
Thank you. Our next question is coming from Stephen V. Please ask your question, Stephen.
Yeah. Do you eat exclusively organic, and do you filter your water? And if so, what do you use?
So I read fast food nation. So that made me give up meat. And then I wrote our book, and then that gave me give up pesticides. So I'm not, I don't do it in all places. If I go to a restaurant, I eat whatever they have. But where I make the decisions about buying things, I try to buy organic. And then I do add a water filter. I think I have a pure water filter. I have no financial relationships to pure. I have a pure water filter on my water at home, my faucet at home. So when I drink water, I use that as my source. And then I wash all my fruits and vegetables, even the organics ones, with water and a vegetable wash.